business, and I've got one too. You can't mind your business. What's the matter with you?
Welcome to the latest episode of the Brand Shorthand Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Vandergrift, and with me is the monarch of marketing, Lorraine Kessler.
How many? You have to have a list of all these. I mean, really, I need to see a list of all these things.
I do have a list of them, and I'm working through them slowly but surely.
Are you using AI?
No, they would never come up with such great things.
Okay.
Well, we are back again to talk about our 50th anniversary and all that's happened in advertising since 1974, our first year in business. For those who missed our last two episodes, go check them out. Dr. Scott Powell from Grove City College was with us to discuss the great things he's doing at Grove City to educate a future generation on the principles of positioning. We've had a lot of great feedback on those episodes, so check them out today. Lorraine, you know, I never like to dive straight into our topic today. So there's some brand news that's worth discussing. And that's this idea of surge pricing. Have you heard about the fiasco that Wendy's has on their hands?
Oh, how can you not hear about it?
Well, the social media backlash has been traumatic, to say the least. Even Elizabeth Warren got involved with a tweet.
That's really something. Well, she needs something to get her back into the foray, I guess.
Well, here's what she wrote. Wendy's is planning to try out surge pricing. That means you could pay more for your lunch, even if the cost of Wendy's stays exactly the same. It's price gouging, plain and simple. And
Yes.
American families have had enough.
Well, she's right about it. You know, it is there's predatory pricing and there's price gouging, and this definitely fits in that bucket.
Well, I like this other tweet. It was by someone much less famous, not me, but they wrote, Wendy's has no idea how easy it is not to go to Wendy's.
Yeah.
But let me back up and share how the story unfolded. So Wendy's issues a news release, and this is how the release was picked up. I'm quoting now. American fast food chain Wendy's is planning to test dynamic pricing and AI menu features in 2025, reports Nation's Restaurant News and Food and Wine. This means that prices for food items will automatically change throughout the day depending on demand, similar to surge pricing in rideshare apps like Uber and Lyft. The initiative was disclosed by Kirk Tanner, the CEO and president of Wendy's, in a recent discussion with analysts. According to Tanner, Wendy's plans to invest approximately $20 million to install digital menu boards capable of displaying these real-time variable prices across all of its company-operated locations in the United States. An additional $10 million is earmarked over 2 years to enhance Wendy's global system, which aims to improve order accuracy and upsell other menu items. So, only hours after that release, they had to issue another statement. Here's from the CEO. Wendy's will not implement surge pricing, which is the practice of raising prices when demand is highest. We didn't use that phrase, nor do we plan to implement that practice, the company said in a prepared statement. The CEO claimed that its new digital menus would not raise prices when our customers are visiting us the most, but would allow restaurants to change the menu offerings at different times of day and offer discounts and value offers to our customers more easily, particularly in the slower times of day. So, Wayne, this is PR 101. Share with us how this might have been avoided with a better PR strategy, and then how it could have been better responded to with a good crisis communication strategy after things backfired.
Well, we all know what their intention was when they were talking with the analysts, right? It was to test dynamic pricing, which is surge pricing.
Yep.
And so first of all, don't leak to analysts, right?
Yeah.
This kind of strategy uh, without really thinking about the consuming public. And obviously, Wendy's, the last person in their mind is the consumer. And particularly the consumer today, when we're going into a presidential political campaign, and across all the news feeds is this concern for grocery prices. You
Mhm.
know, they've increased maybe 15% over the last 2 years. So families are feeling the pinch. Fast food has a great opportunity to capitalize on that, right? By offering discounts and value meals at different times of the day. That's what their message should have been. It allows us to do value based pricing in a dynamic way that really serves the American families today and gives them an option. So they were totally ignorant of the context in which this came. They certainly didn't do anything to protect the release. Was this Restaurant News that you read from?
And Food and Wine, both of them.
And Food
Yep.
and Wine, which really flags their, I think, their real intention. And, you know, so they undermined the consuming public. They did not give enough credit to what's going on in the greater context in terms of food costs. And this really reads as a predatory pricing stance, one where they want to take advantage of people who are their most loyal customers, right? The third part of this, A, the meeting, B, letting it leak out, the context is, as I think that one quote you read uh, states really nicely, competition. I mean, they just handed to their competitors, and I think there's a Burger King take on this, right? They just handed to them on a plate a way to really go after Wendy's hard,
Yeah.
and Burger King does. You can't blame them because that's the game. There's so many. The fast food market is so competitive. Now, I read somewhere that this was, and maybe you even read it, I think just a minute ago, but something about this surge pricing comes from Lyft and
Uber
Uber.
and Lyft. Yep.
You can't just lift, LIFT, strategies from one category and transplant them into another without a full understanding of the context of where the consumer is, what amount of competition you have, and competitive moves, and how they're likely to come after you for whatever you do. And that's what a competitor will do. They'll attack because that's how they get market share. So, um, you know, I think this miscalculation is pretty egregious. You asked me, how do you remedy it? You know, it's a self inflicted wound.
Hmm.
It's a little different than the Tylenol case that we've always talked about,
Oh, yeah.
um, in which they did all the right things. But they weren't to blame in any regard to what happened with those. For those who are too young, they might not know that pill bottles within, I think it was the Chicago market, were tampered with by um, a consumer who wanted to murder his wife, but planted poison in several bottles so that it didn't seem like the target was his wife.
Mhm.
Tylenol didn't miss a beat, came out, and the reason we have all these safety seals now is because of that case. So what now? Well, I think the best thing is just kind of be quiet and start acting and start doing things that are about the value meals, the value promotions. And I'd even go so far as to be dramatic and do kind of a free lunch Monday kind of promotion.
Mhm.
Buy a drink, get a free lunch. And not just one Monday, but maybe do that for a while.
Mm.
Yeah, it's going to hurt a little, but that's what happens when you have these kinds of things happen. They're going to hurt you either forever, or you can start to remedy that situation by establishing some customer integrity, which I think they've lost an enormous amount about during this.
Well,
So it,
strategically, don't you think that
Mhm.
think about restaurants. When is a discount time that's most common? Happy hour,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, even most fast food restaurants have adopted this where they'll say, stop in between 2 and 5 and get a free fry or
yeah,
something like that. So if you really meant that you wanted to pass along discounted pricing, you could have couched it like that and said, the great thing is we're going to have discounted pricing at various times throughout the day that won't just be 2 to 5 or whatever it is. It'll be at our slow times, and never indicate that there was anything to do with surge pricing or taking the model from Uber or Lyft. But like you said, they stole the idea in a way that made people think, oh, well, Uber and Lyft call it surge pricing, so that's what Wendy's is trying. So
Yeah.
it just strategically, to me, it might not have been the execution of the PR that was so bad. Although, like you said, testing it out with analysts is never a good idea, because what are the analysts thinking of? How
Yeah.
are you going to make more money? Right?
Well, and how did they present it to the analysts? I mean, someone was there to report it, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think they made this up in
No.
what they heard. So how they presented it, to your point, from the beginning to the analysts should be, we're a leader in fast food. We recognize the context of Americans today who are concerned about food costs. We are going to a dynamic, value-based menu whereby we can expand the market of Wendy's people by bringing more Wendy's customers in who find sometimes our pricing might be a deterrent, because Wendy's is higher priced.
Yep.
And we're going to have value times that are dynamic based on different slower periods. And that will hopefully bring the Wendy's value to more customers in a way they can afford, and seeing it as a benefit to the customer. But, even the one apology I saw was even all about how they're just going to use data. It's all about them falling in love with data in order to do this dynamic or surge pricing. So it was a really poor early response. The first response was like kind of a quip. So again, authenticity is so important, and it's so, once you bruise that, it doesn't heal quickly.
Well, I need to take that clip and send it
Mhm.
to Wendy's headquarters, because you just said that in such a eloquent way
Mhm.
that if I had been an analyst, I would have been, I love that. What a great idea. And
Right.
I would have never picked up surge pricing from what you said.
No. Like I said, I don't think the editors and the reporters invented that.
No, no
They
way.
may have made the connection between what they were hearing in dynamic pricing and surge pricing, but I don't think they were filling in the pieces. I think they actually heard the intention that, and I could see how this would happen. You're in a closed room, you're CEO, you're talking about them to investors and analysts, right?
Yep.
And guess who you forget that is listening? The consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing is in closed doors anymore. And they completely went deaf and blind at that moment.
Well,
Which is,
Burger King did a great job, and I've never given Burger King credit. One, I'm not a big fan of their food,
yeah.
but I don't eat a lot of fast food, so don't
I am
take.
a fan of their marketing. They went
Yeah,
back to have it your
yeah,
way,
they got back. Yeah,
and
getting back to what they've done here with You Rule.
you
But what
rule.
they did is they came out and said the only thing surging here are flames, and we're cooking more Whoppers than anyone, so we're giving away a free Whopper. So huge kudos to picking up on that and doing something with it, because
And,
they're
and,
going to win a lot of customers.
and this is a lesson for positioning. We've often talked about positioning as a competitive strategy first. Like, the battle for perception is about differentiation. And so you have to map what ideas are available. Like, can we have this idea? Does someone own it? Then we can have it. How do
Mhm.
we find an idea that's unique and has value with a certain target audience? That's one. But you also have to be asking yourself the question, what is the competition's ability to respond?
Mhm.
All right. And can they respond with greater force? So, this reminds me kind of as a weird analog, but the Datril Tylenol story. And I don't know if you know this one, but, Tylenol came out in the 70s with acetaminophen, which was gentle on pain. And they commanded the market, and they squashed all the aspirin based buffer, bear, Anacin, all those guys. And they were in a field of their own, as we love to say, a category of their own. So Datril comes along from Bristol Myers, and they come up with a strategy. of, well, I think they said we're just as good as Tylenol, only cheaper. All right. So, which is actually a very good position for number two, because you can, if you want to grab market share and probably grab more market share from that aspirin group of brands I mentioned, not a bad strategy, except for they miscalculated on two fronts, which is similar here. One is they test marketed the idea. So they didn't launch it nationally, which is like the enigma in World War II gave Tylenol the ability to say, wait, something's going on here. We're going to be attacked. What does a leader do? You
Attack
should.
themselves.
The only one who can play offense aggressively is the leader.
Yep.
So now you've just alerted Tylenol to this. Then by time Daytril did launch their campaign nationally, Tylenol within a weekend lowered their prices, used all their media power to tell all the TV programs running the Daytril ads, that now their lower price is false. So the ads had to be cut. I mean, it is, I hate to say it is warfare, and
Yep.
it's not always pretty, but that is a classic. And this reminds me of Wendy's. Premature launch, premature statement, not well thought out, allows others to attack your position.
Yep. Yep. Wow.
Mhm.
Well, crazy. These large corporations just keep making blunder after blunder. Maybe one of these days they'll call us for some real help.
I think in part because I don't think they have a lot of history. And, one of the things that the study of positioning gives us is that we can look at case studies like Daytril and Tylenol, and we can look back and say what went right, what went wrong. And the principles seem to be immutable. The brands change and why people's tastes change and fads change. But what doesn't is the basic principle. And I just think we have, as we do in politics and everything, there's just a loss of history. There's a loss of that historical knowledge that would be very beneficial.
Yeah. Well, let's get to our final category here, or next to final category.
Yeah.
And that is the growing importance of branding.
Yeah.
So I'll put on the screen again our list of the major changes that we've seen in the last 50 years by category. We've covered media proliferation, technological changes, targeting and personalization capabilities, transactional media, and B2B advertising. Today's going to be the growing importance of branding. And then next week, we'll finish out with experiential marketing,
Right.
which also relates to the growing importance of branding. So today, we'll tackle our favoritist of favorite topics, the growing importance of branding. Lorraine, I know you have some insightful opinions on this matter,
Well,
how this has evolved. I mean,
well,
that's the critical thing. You just said you have history.
yeah.
And that's the critical thing on this topic. It's not that we just believe branding is important today more than ever, but it has grown over the past 50 years. So Lorraine, go ahead and kick this topic off.
Yeah. Well, let me start with a paradox that you wouldn't expect, right? Is that not everyone needs branding to sell stuff, right?
True.
Yet everyone has a brand whether they know it or not. So it's a kind of a paradox. We all can name things we bought that we have no idea what the brand is, particularly if you're buying on Amazon or one of the e-commerce. I just bought not inexpensively lounge chairs for our deck at the lake. I couldn't tell you the name of the brand if you put it on a list. So doesn't really matter because I was looking at features, benefits, and kind of price and all those things that you can do on Amazon. So in a way, Amazon kind of became anti-branding or devalues many brands, and we need to remember that. But for most companies, and particularly in the U.S., yes, branding has evolved to be extremely important in decision. Any brand who has as its objective to command market share against strong competitors in its category, who wants to desensitize the customer's natural sensitivity to price to deliver a higher margin and higher profit, who wants a sustainable business that they can either hand over to another generation if they're private, or can take from startup to IPO, or even if they're already public, return a sustainable investor return that makes sense for a long time. These companies need brands, and where it's evolved, I think. First of all, just look at the number of books that have been written in the last
On
few.
branding. Right.
Right. You want to know if there's a wind on something, on any category, just look at who's publishing and how much is being published. But in the beginning days, when I was working with companies, it was mainly about, we need to advertise this. We need to advertise this service. We're a hospital. We're going to advertise this service and put our logo at the bottom. And there was this sense that the logo and the name, that was enough, right? And the service was the king. That's kind of flip-flopped. People need to have, you can still do that kind of marketing. Certainly if you have a unique service or something that is a profit generator or revenue generator, you want to focus on that. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm just saying more is needed. Name awareness has to be attached to a meaning. Make meaning, make money is what Guy Kawasaki always says, and I believe in that. So when we look at a time, particularly in the U.S., maybe in some other markets, but the U.S. is really atypical in this regard. We are so moneyed as a nation and have so many categories that are just filled with competitors that your hope of doing any of the things I mentioned mean that you have to build a strong brand meaning. You have to stand for something that sets you apart, as simply as it can be said. And the emphasis on that piece has become much more important as it's attached to your name. It's not like you forget the name. I have to attach that meaning to a name. So it's now a two-for game. You have to do both. And we know, because we've seen that features and benefits are commoditized, right? You can look at, we have this kind of, we have Teflon or we have titanium. Well, everybody does. So it's just not enough. And then the thing that's really changed, I think, in branding as we've moved is this idea of a brand trying to go, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, I think, later, about experiential level. And there's many ways to talk about that. But one of the key ingredients is, how does this brand meaning connect with my own self-identity or what I want to project about my self-identity? That I'm athletic, that I'm rich, that I'm smart, that I'm educated, that I'm a beer drinking football fan, whatever image someone wants to connect, that is part of the brand experience. And so I think there's been a lot more conversation around that experience. And, what people are looking for is me and mine. Right? Me and mine. I mean, it's the output of what was called the me generation. I think that was Gen Z. It's just intensified in this area. And we see this in all sorts of ways, where people proudly wear their logo merchandise, walk around with their Stanley Cup, the new hip thing. All of that is about me first.
Well, what's interesting, you started out with the fact that some of the brands you purchased on Amazon, you don't even know what they are. And I want to connect some dots here for our listeners, because in a while back, I read an article, and guess what it was titled, Lorraine? Branding is dead, right? If you ever want to get readers, just put something is dead and you'll read it. So branding is dead. And guess who the primary contributor to the article was? Amazon.
Yeah.
And their point was basically what you just said. You'll buy something and you won't know what the brand is. But let me make another connection. So if you listen to Scott Powell last week, he was talking about his book business, or I guess it would have been 2 weeks ago in the first part of his interview.
Yeah.
He did the book business, and he moved 1.3 million books in a year period. He brought in about 200, I think he said $285,000 maybe is what it was. And what did he end up netting out of that?
Was it like $1,000 or something?
$4,000. Okay.
In poker.
So here's the point is, you can either go and brand or build a brand. And as we know, the greater the brand, the greater the margin, right? Make money, make meaning, make money. But if you're going to give your soul over to the Amazons of the world, the Etsy's of the world, etc., then you better have volume that's unheard of, because your margin's going to be so little that you have to ask yourself, is it really worth being in business? Because it's more about just saying, well, I have a brand. It's about, I want to create something. I want to create a business that's contributing to people's lives and making meaning in the community, and et cetera, et cetera. All the wonderful things that we talk about for why you want to either start or build and have a great business.
Absolutely.
And so to me, what you stated was, I bought lounge chairs and I wonder how little bit of margin they made on those lounge chairs,
Right.
because it costs so much money to be on Amazon. And do you need a brand? No, but you're giving away all of the margin that you might have made and would have spent less building a brand. You're giving that all up and handing it over to Amazon.
Right.
And of course, we know Amazon is one of the magnificent seven, along with Apple and Nvidia and Meta and Tesla and another one I can't remember, Google. And they're, I mean, they're the big seven.
Yeah.
So all you're doing is making the rich richer when you decide to sell your soul through Amazon.
Yeah, it ultimately comes down to control, right? Do you want
Yeah.
to control what you're building, and do you want it to end up giving you greater return on the investment, or do you want to keep pushing, keep pushing that wheelbarrow
Yeah.
uphill and then having to reload it with new firewood? And I think there's a great, I love analogies, but there's a great visual analogy in the book Good to Great. Is branding is like a flywheel, right? You start pushing it, but eventually it goes on its own. It takes on its own momentum, and that's a happy place to be.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm going to mix something in here to just
mhm.
make this all a little interesting. We're going to work in a little Mark Ritson today.
Oh yeah. Oh, the irascible.
Yeah. So for those who don't know Mark Ritson, just Google him. He's you like to use the word provocateur,
Yeah.
Lorraine. I
Yeah.
think he's a provocateur to the extreme. He might be the
Yeah.
dictionary definition of provocateur.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
apologize ahead of time if you do Google him and you don't like four-letter words in your ears, then just don't Google him,
Don't
because
watch
that's
him.
what
Yeah.
you're going to get.
If that makes you stop listening, then
Yeah.
don't listen to him.
Yeah, then don't listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see more in Googling him than you care to find out. So Mark Ritson was recently interviewed for an article published on Mumbrella.com, which is an Australian publication. It was an article that came out February 20th. And the
Right.
article LEDE, is a bit misleading because it focuses on radio advertising. But when you dive into the article, it's basically about whether there is a balance in brand advertising, meaning they actually asked the question, can you do too much?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we already know the answer, can you do too little? I think most clients do too little.
Yeah.
But they discuss a study that tested what is known through the acronym ESOV, which stands for excessive share of voice, ESOV.
I thought you said SOB. I was going to say, already we're starting.
Well, it is Mark Ritson, so that probably comes
Yeah.
out of his mouth much more than
Yeah.
ESOV.
Yeah.
The theory is that a brand can overspend on advertising. So let me ask you a few questions, and we'll start from the top down, from kind of a
Right.
general question, Lorraine, to specific. He answers these, but I want to hear how you answer him.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
here's a quote that introduces the first question. This is a quote from Ritson.
Okay.
The nature of marketing means it's reflexive. It deals with human behavior. It's not geology. It's not physics. So there are some principles, but they're principles for bending. Do you buy, Lorraine, I'm asking, do you buy into Ritson's theory that marketing is not scientific for the most part?
Yeah, 100% I agree. Now, what can be more scientific is the measurement of what works and what doesn't work, and how many people saw an ad, and how many impressions you made, and how many click-throughs. Those are empiricals, but that doesn't even prove that you're building great brand value, right? I mean, all that's the whole thing. It could build a bridge to nowhere land. And meanwhile, you still are wondering why you're not number one or you're not even number two. So, um,
He says the fact that marketing is science, he believes that is a four-letter word. So
yeah,
he's got
well, that's fine. Um, and I will, I'm very taken with the Nobel Prize winner who wrote the book. His name is Daniel Kahneman. I don't know if it's pronounced Kahneman or Kahneman or whatever, but in his book, and this jibes with everything else we know and have read about why people buy what they buy. He talks about two systems. We have system one and system two thinking, right? So system one um, is the system that operates automatically and quickly. It's really the system for recognition. I walk into a room, I immediately recognize you, Mark. I want to call you, and I know your phone number. I overhear a conversation, I know it's negative or positive, right? I know how to get from point A to point B and tell people what street to. This is all system one. System one is always active. It's not voluntary. It's involuntary. But it really rules. And this is the system where emotion resides and we do things intuitively. And it's kind of sad that people feel, well, that must not be that that must be the weaker part of the brain. No, that is absolutely, without system one, you would be brains on a plate. Okay. You'd be brains on a plate. System one actually convinces system two of what it needs or what it should want. Now that's kind of a problem because system one's going to make very snap judgments, right? You know, we have the old bat and ball riddle. I don't know if you remember that.
Yep.
And people will immediately answer it incorrectly. They'll say if a bat and a ball were $1.10, the bat is $1 more than the ball. How much is the ball? Almost immediately, most people will say, well, the ball's 10 cents. And the true answer is it's 5 cents. But it takes system two, the calculator, to figure that out.
Right.
Because sometimes the automatic is wrong, and that's where we get confirmation bias. But the true thing that he's talking about is we don't know why people buy for real, because these decisions are made intuitively and emotionally. And I think that a really good book on this was by Mark Ritson, Biology, Truth and Lies and Why We Buy What We Buy kind of thing. I think that's the name of the book. But it's a good book because there's proof, positive, with tests, that we lie about why we buy what we buy. And we're looking to satisfy something in our own ego 90% of the time, 100% of the time. And then we convince system two, or the rational side of the brain, why it needs this. And one of the more interesting studies is system two. If I were doing math calculations, which I know, Mark, would be a rarity.
I would be all happy.
Yeah. But if I were doing math calculations, that would engage system two, which requires a lot more energy than system one. And if I were doing that and I got a blurb about a sweet, guess what? I would have my chance of eating that sweet at that time would be higher when system two is overloaded.
Yep.
So it's just a really interesting study. I didn't want to get too deep in it, but I agree with him for a lot of reasons that are backed by, ironically, studies and evidence, maybe not science. And the psychology of the brain as we know it is soft science, right? So I like his word that it's reflexive and that it bends.
Human behavior.
Yeah.
So to summarize your answer then, we're basically saying that marketing has to deal with the irrational side of the brain. So you can't take rational scientific side input and impact the irrational side.
Yeah,
It has to be creative,
right.
so that the creative side of the brain is responding to it.
The intuitive side where impressions are made. And I would say system one, like for example, people will pay a fortune for a Rolex watch. They know it's a Swiss watch. That's about all they know. Do they know how it's made? What kind of parts it's in it? What kind of metals? Who's making it? How many they make it? They don't know any of that stuff. That's all rational. That's all system two fulfilling. And we don't know any of that. And yet people buy Rolexes.
Yeah. Well, let's go to the next question you already hinted at. So of the science he says he does believe in, which is this ESOV theory, do you buy into his agreement there is a brand marketing equilibrium that you can achieve. And just so our listeners understand, there's overspending or excessive share of voice, and there's underspending.
Okay.
And he believes somewhere in between that, there's an equilibrium where if you don't spend a penny more, it's not going to impact how much your brand is purchased.
This relates to something in the 80s we used to call advertising wear out. Now, having worked in this business 4 decades plus, 99% of advertisers spend too little. So we're arguing from the extreme.
Yep.
It's like when people say, I want to do what Nike did, but just do it. And then we say, well, what's your budget? And they say, $10,000. Oh, is that for a month? No, that's a year. So it's arguing from the extreme. That's an extreme success about an extreme company who invested heavily with constancy and consistency over time. So it's bothersome for us as agency people when I hear that this is somehow a problem and we gotta, because what our clients here that we have is who don't really want to spend money on marketing. They'd rather spend marketing money on product invention as if it's just going to move itself to the marketplace. That this is like music to their ears. Oh, I don't have to spend a lot. So I always think there's a danger there. But what he's talking about, there's one brand that I wondered, and we've talked about this before, that has achieved, who's overspending, in my opinion.
Farmer's dog, right?
It's unbelievable. But you know what? I finally Googled them because I think there has to be a rationale to this madness of this. John just yesterday, we have 2 separate TVs. He had like 3 ads. And I'm like, I don't get this. Apparently they want to go to IPO. So they are doing, I still think they're overspending. And I call this parasitic advertising. It's creating your own parasite to eat your own brand value. It's at some point you are annoying the customer beyond belief. And that's not a good thing. But the rarity of that is great. I mean, it's not a big problem to be addressed. And I want those who are listening to know, most companies are not spending enough.
Yep. Okay, another opinion of his is that the bigger the brand, the less share of voice you need. Here's his quote. If you have a 20% share of a market, you don't need 20% of the share of voice to maintain it. It can be 15% and you'll be fine. This to me is a maintenance question, Lorraine. Should we ever think about a brand going into maintenance mode?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in every category, there's a top share percentage you can get. It can be 20, it can be 40. It rarely is above that. It becomes monopoly. And maintenance mode, I don't think is so much about the brand meaning or value as it is about allocation of spending dollars. So you and I know, because we've read David Aker's book, Brand Portfolio Strategy, that most of these brands that we're spending at this level have a portfolio of multi-brands, right? So one of the things that you have to do is manage those brands strategically from a resource allocation, principally money. So if you have a cash cow, to keep investing in that cash cow, particularly if that cash cow is, let's say, an old generation product, and invest in it commensurate to the revenue, means that you're going to starve Energizer brands or future brands or brands that have a hope or acquisitions that could really jumpstart your whole portfolio. I wouldn't do that. So do you keep advertising Hilton hotels or Hilton Rewards, which is a loyalty program? Right. So I think this is an allocation problem. And I think that David Aker's book, Brand Portfolio Strategy, is great for people to kind of think about what is the role that each brand plays in the portfolio and how they should be funded. And the reason this is so important, if you have an Energizer brand, or let's say a future brand, something you're investing in that you think is going to be the next big thing in your beverage portfolio, and it's not soda or cola, but it's something totally different, that has no revenue. So how are you going to support that? You've got to take that from the cash cow product and bring it over And so it takes a little bit of it takes strategy, but it takes a little bit of calculated risk to do
Yeah.
that.
Well, and we've always talked about the idea that you do take a break from advertising for a very short period of times
Hmm.
to allow the mind to rest, if you will, of
Right.
seeing your ads. But the one thing that sticks out to me is that if you ever think you're going into maintenance mode on your marketing, you're probably going into maintenance mode on your business. And the one thing that a business needs to do is keep innovating, because
Well, you're right.
our favorite business strategist, Peter Drucker, says there's only two things that a business is responsible to do, right?
Yeah.
Innovate, and or only two things that produce a customer: innovation and marketing. So
And that's
yeah.
why it's important to not starve, but go into maintenance mode on brands like Cash Cow or those that have achieved a certain level of market share. You don't think you're going to get much more to invest in innovation.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, they give the example of Coke in this article. They asked Ritson, what if Coke just stopped advertising for 2 to 3 years?
Hmm.
Um, and how long would it take for sales to drop? And they said it would take 2 to 3 years before there's a dip in sales, but it would take another 2 to 3 years before the sales would recover if they started advertising again. So this speaks to me, this speaks to the power of brand advertising in the first place. It shows that brand advertising corresponds to sales, but the mind necessarily is slow to react. So if my advertising is like this, the mind's following it, and advertising drops off, the mind keeps going for a while. And
Yep.
then it might finally go, oh, you know what? I haven't seen a Coke ad in years. Oh, you know what?
Flywheel.
I'm not even buying Coke anymore. I never thought. So what's your take on this observation from the article?
Well, again, I go back to the flywheel, right? You build
Yeah.
up so much momentum, and it does. And one of the things, and I don't remember the brands now, I should have because we just did this. But when we did the Super Bowl, I was really surprised at the number of ads that said they had a 2, 3 year hiatus and they're returning. And
Hmm.
I thought they were there last year or the
Yeah.
year before. I had
Yeah.
no idea they stepped out. So there is this residual value and it continues. And you just got to monitor it, right? You've just got to monitor it. And because every now and then that flywheel is going to need a little push to
Well, I
even,
think Doritos, your favorite commercial there, the Dinamita,
right.
I
And
think Doritos was one of those brands that had not done brand advertising. They had done transactional,
right.
but they had not done any major brand advertising in at least a year, if I remember correctly.
Right. So it was really, to me, interesting because there were a number of brands, car brands and things like that, that I thought for sure were in last year. And they'd say, oh, returning after a 2 year hiatus.
Yeah.
So they didn't lose anything. They really didn't lose anything. But it is a calculated risk. It's a calculated guess, I guess, right? Um, and Coca-Cola is an interesting example because it kind of goes to the portfolio strategy, right? Um, the traditional cola category has been declining for many years as health concerns and taste have changed, and there's all sorts of new drinks and everything from energy drinks to fruit drinks to health drinks. And then you even mentioned, and we mentioned that we thought one of the best Super Bowl ads that we didn't even see coming was this poppy,
Hmm.
right?
Have you
Which is
seen any ads since then, though?
no,
I
I
haven't either. I even went to their website and I didn't get any retargeting messages or anything. This is where it, like, I just
drive you nuts.
conceive of sinking all your money into a Super Bowl spot and then you stop. Now,
Yep.
maybe I'm just missing it, but I the fact that I've gone to their website, it at least with retargeting, I should see something.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because they promoted themselves as we're a soda with
Yep.
none of the bad stuff,
Yep.
very effectively.
Yep.
I had heard. Did you tell me that someone was looking to buy them? Was it
Pepsi.
you? Pepsi? Okay, well, that's a perfect example of allocation of money.
Hmm.
Um, and one of the things Dick Majori has always said is when a category is going down and your product's going down with it, not just your product but the category too. Do you want to throw good money after bad?
Hmm.
And I think that's the position that Coke and Pepsi are in.
Yeah.
So what do they want? They innovate, and they don't innovate; they acquire. So Poppy is that new innovation.
Yeah.
that could give Pepsi a little bit of a jolt. And
Yeah.
I'd rather spend my money on that. And maybe that's all Poppy thought, was maybe that was their target audience. We don't know. You know?
Well, now that I'm thinking about it, it might have even been Coke, but I'm still curious on the Pepsi Poppy thing where it's so close
Yeah.
category that it was an interesting move to name their, if there was any intentionality behind naming it Poppy to be close to Pepsi.
Yeah.
But we'll see down the road. So, well, anything else you want to share about the rise of branding in the past 50 years before we close up this episode?
Yeah, I'll talk about the good and the bad. Okay. I think the good is, for most part, people have a deeper understanding of brand meaning and what that it's a gut impression that I have to attach to the brand that has value to me specifically. And then that creates kind of a cluster of people who share those like values. You're not going to get everybody. I think we've evolved, hopefully, to that understanding. Um, and that's the good.
Mhm.
The bad is, I still think there's a hangover from the 80s, right? Where everything about brand was just image as decided by design.
Mhm.
Now, design's really important, but because design, it's really hard to separate the words from the words. In fact, are images. People don't realize that, but that's how when we translate English, we actually are thinking in terms of images. But I'm talking about the 80s, when we used to get into these formulaic templated ads, where we confused, I think, uniformity with unity.
Mhm.
So a brand can really stretch and still have unity and still be connected to the core design wise. You don't need these rigid templates, or the logo only has to be shown one way or this way or no way. That actually kind of kills the energy of the brand.
Mhm.
And I still think we have some hangovers from that time period that need to kind of go away. And that part of the advertising to me is like, Elton John is Elton John, right? But he can wear a lot of different costumes.
Yep.
And when you think about creating the ads themselves, they should be like the costumes, the outfits, not and still speak to Elton John. And
Yeah.
I think more brands need to get kind of that going for them.
Yep. I mean, without positioning, all that branding is just, to me, it's just aesthetics.
Yeah.
And if we don't make meaning, we're not going to make money. So going back to Guy there to close out our quotes. But thanks for joining us, Lorraine, as usual. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. If you haven't liked, shared, subscribed, or told your friends about the Brand Shorthand podcast, please do. And
Yep.
until next time, have an amazing day.
Nobody's business but my own.